the Amazon rainforest. To stand on its edge is to confront a vastness that defies imagination. A green ocean stretching over 5.5 million square kilometers, draped across 9 modern nations, fed by a river so wide that at its mouth it pushes the Atlantic Ocean back. The air hums with unseen life. The canopy rises like a living cathedral, its vaults thick with birds, monkeys, and insects. The ground is soft, wet, and restless. At first glance, it appears eternal, untamed, untouched by human hands. But what if that image is wrong? What if beneath this seemingly pristine wilderness lies the memory of a lost civilization, a people who not only survived in this challenging environment, but thrived, reshaping it on a scale we are only now beginning to understand. For centuries, the Amazon was described as an empty land. To European colonists, it was a place where small, scattered tribes eked out an existence, too few and too fragile to create lasting societies. The soils were poor, the floods unpredictable, the insects merciless. Agriculture, it was believed, could never sustain great populations here. And yet, whispers of something greater persisted. In the chronicles of the very first Europeans to travel its waters are descriptions of cities, roads, and armies numbering in the thousands. These accounts were ridiculed, dismissed as exaggerations born of greed or delirium. For generations, the consensus was clear. The Amazon had no great civilizations. It was a wilderness then, and it had always been. But in recent decades, science has begun to tell a different story. Archaeologists, armed with new tools like LiDAR and satellite imagery, have stripped away the forest canopy to reveal a hidden world of earthworks, roads, and settlements. Soil scientists have uncovered mysterious patches of rich black earth, terra preta, scattered across the basin, a human-made soil that remains fertile for centuries. Botanists have realized that much of the Amazon's extraordinary biodiversity may not be entirely natural, but the result of millennia of human cultivation. The forest itself, once seen as untouched, is increasingly understood as a cultural artifact, a landscape shaped by human ingenuity. And so the question returns with new force. What if the explorers were right? What if, hidden beneath vines and centuries of regrowth, there truly was a lost civilization in the Amazon? The first European to encounter this possibility was Francisco de Orellana, a Spanish conquistador who in 1541 set out with Gonzalo Pizarro in search of El Dorado, the fabled land of gold. Supplies dwindled, men starved, and Orellana, commanding a smaller detachment, drifted eastward in a desperate bid for survival. What followed was a journey that would take him down the entire length of the Amazon River, a voyage of discovery, terror, and myth-making. The chronicler Gaspar de Carvajal, a Dominican friar who traveled with Orellana, left us the most vivid account. As the expedition floated downriver, Carvajal described scenes that seemed impossible for Europeans of the time to imagine. He wrote of villages that stretched for miles along the riverbanks, of markets bustling with activity, of well-built houses and fertile fields. He claimed that at times they were attacked by thousands of warriors in organized formations, suggesting polities capable of mobilizing armies. He even described broad roads leading inland from the river, hinting at networks hidden beyond the trees. Most famously, Carvajal recorded an encounter with tribes led by women warriors, fierce fighters who reminded the Spaniards of the Amazons of Greek legend. From this story, the great river took its name, the Amazon. To Carvajal, the evidence was overwhelming. This was no wilderness. It was a land filled with people, wealth, and order. Towns lined the river like pearls on a string, their plazas echoing with life. The chronicler S. words painted the Amazon as a mirror of the civilizations Spaniards had already encountered in the Andes and Mesoamerica. Though different in material, equal in scale. And yet, within a generation, Carvajal's account was doubted. Later expeditions found no such cities, no vast populations. By the 17th century, scholars dismissed his story as fantasy, a fabrication born of fever, hunger, or ambition. The myth of El Dorado, the city of gold, had already lured countless men to their deaths. Why not place Carvajal's Amazonian cities in the same category? For centuries, that is exactly what happened. But the truth is more complex. When Orellana's expedition passed down the Amazon, it unknowingly carried pathogens from Europe: smallpox, measles, influenza. These diseases spread faster than explorers themselves, sweeping through villages, killing indiscriminately, collapsing entire societies within a generation. The towns Carvajal described may have been real, but by the time others returned, they were gone, erased by epidemic collapse. And unlike the stone-built cities of the Maya or the Inca, which could endure abandonment, Amazonian towns were made of wood, earth, and thatch. Once deserted, they melted back into the forest with astonishing speed. What had been a city one year could vanish within decades, leaving only fragments of pottery and dark patches of soil. Still, the stories never disappeared entirely. Jesuit missionaries in the 17th century wrote of geometric clearings and causeways. Farmers stumbled upon strange soils that never exhausted themselves, calling them Indian black earth. Indigenous oral histories spoke of great ancestors, of roads and towns swallowed by the forest, of calamities that scattered people into smaller groups. These whispers persisted on the margins of knowledge, dismissed, but never silenced. The myth of El Dorado loomed large in European imagination, feeding the skepticism. Originally drawn from Andean rituals where rulers covered themselves in gold dust before plunging into sacred lakes, the story of the Gilded One grew into a tale of a golden city hidden in the jungle. Expeditions scoured the Amazon, losing men to disease, hunger, and conflict, always returning empty-handed. The jungle seemed a trickster, offering hints of grandeur but yielding only hardship. Over time, scholars concluded that the Amazon was incapable of sustaining civilization. Betty Meggers, a pioneering 20th century anthropologist, famously described it as a counterfeit paradise, abundant in appearance, barren in reality. The poor soils, she argued, limited human society to small, scattered bands. To imagine great cities here was folly. But this view was built on absence. The absence of stone ruins, the absence of written records, the absence of survivors in numbers large enough to testify. The rainforest had erased the evidence, and in its place, scholars filled the void with assumption. Civilization, they decided, was something that happened elsewhere. Yet today, the tide has turned. With each new discovery, with each patch of terra preta unearthed, with each LiDAR map revealing geometric earthworks under the canopy, the story changes. Carvajal's words no longer read like fantasy. They read like eyewitness testimony of a world erased too quickly for later generations to see. And so we ask again, what if he was right? What if, in the heart of the Amazon, there truly was a civilization, populous, organized, and enduring, that has remained invisible for centuries, waiting for us to rediscover it? For centuries, the Amazon was imagined as a lush but inhospitable wilderness, a place too wild, too unstable, too unforgiving for complex societies to flourish. On the surface, the reasoning seemed sound. The rainforest was abundant in life, yes, but it was a deceptive abundance. Beneath the towering trees and tangled vines, the very soil seemed to betray humanity. Most of the Amazon soil is notoriously poor. Heavy rains leach nutrients away, leaving behind acidic, nutrient-starved clays. Farmers who attempted to cultivate crops in these soils found them quickly exhausted. Within a few years, their fields failed. To outsiders, this was conclusive proof. Civilization, after all, rests on agriculture, and agriculture rests on soil. If the Amazon soil could not support permanent farming, then it could not support permanent societies. This idea hardened into orthodoxy in the mid-20th century when the influential anthropologist Betty Meggers declared the Amazon a counterfeit paradise. It looked like Eden, she argued, but it was a mirage. Its richness was biological, not agricultural, and therefore unsuited to dense human populations. Her view shaped decades of research, reinforcing the belief that the Amazon had always been home only to small, scattered bands of semi-nomadic people. But while scholars debated, farmers and locals knew something different. Scattered throughout the basin, they worked soils unlike any other, soils that defied the Amazon's reputation for infertility. These soils were dark, almost black, and astonishingly fertile. Crops flourished in them. Unlike the exhausted clays, these patches remained productive year after year, generation after generation. Locals called them Terra Preta de Indio, Indian black earth. For centuries, Terra Preta was an enigma. Some speculated it was volcanic, others thought it was natural, formed by floods or lightning strikes. But as scientists studied it more closely, the truth became clear. Terra Preta was not natural at all. It was engineered. It was, in effect, a human-made soil, one of the greatest agricultural innovations in the pre-Columbian world. At its core was charcoal. Ancient Amazonians produced it not by open fire, but by smoldering organic matter under low oxygen conditions, creating a stable form of carbon known today as biochar. Into this charcoal, they mixed food scraps, fish bones, pottery shards, animal remains, and plant waste. Over time, these ingredients transformed poor, acidic clay into a rich, dark soil teeming with nutrients and microbial life. What makes Terra Preta extraordinary is its durability. Unlike most tropical soils, which degrade quickly, Terra Preta regenerates. Even after centuries of use, it can remain fertile. In some cases, it actually improves over time as microbial communities replenish nutrients. Modern experiments have shown that crops planted in Terra Preta yield significantly more than those grown in surrounding soils. The implications are staggering. Terra Preta is not found in a few isolated pockets. It occurs across vast stretches of the Amazon basin, sometimes in patches spanning hundreds of hectares. By some estimates, Terra Preta may cover up to 10% of the entire Amazon, an area the size of France. This is not the work of scattered tribes making incidental improvements. This is the signature of large organized populations practicing deliberate, long-term landscape management. Imagine the scale. To create Terra Preta, ancient communities had to gather fuel, control burning conditions, transport waste, and maintain soil health over centuries. It required knowledge of chemistry, ecology, and agriculture, knowledge transmitted across generations. Far from being limited by the Amazon soils, these people overcame them, turning scarcity into abundance. And what did they grow? Archaeological evidence points to a diverse agricultural base. Cassava, or manioc, was central, a root crop that thrives in the tropics and remains a staple today. Maize and beans supplemented diets along with squashes, peppers, and fruits. Orchards of Brazil nuts, palms, and other useful trees were cultivated around settlements. Some scientists argue that much of the wild Amazon forest is in fact a human-shaped orchard, the legacy of ancient cultivation that persists long after its creators vanished. This realization reframes the Amazon itself. For generations, it was seen as an untouched wilderness, a natural paradise. But the discovery of Terra Preta forces us to see it differently, not as untouched, but as a cultural landscape shaped and managed by human hands. In this view, the rainforest is not a place humans endured, but a place they transformed. The scale of transformation suggests something else: population. Scholars now estimate that before European contact, between 5 and 10 million people may have lived in the Amazon. That would make it one of the most densely populated regions of the Americas, rivaling the great civilizations of the Andes and Mesoamerica. The towns and cities Carvajal described, stretching for miles along the riverbanks, suddenly seem plausible, supported by a foundation of engineered soil and managed forests. The discovery of Terra Preta also carries implications for today. In an age of climate crisis and soil degradation, scientists look to it as a model for sustainable agriculture. By sequestering carbon in stable biochar, Terra Preta locks greenhouse gases into the ground for centuries, while simultaneously improving fertility. Some researchers argue that reviving these techniques could help fight climate change and restore degraded soils worldwide. What ancient Amazonians achieved out of necessity may now hold lessons for global survival, but perhaps the most poetic aspect of Terra Preta is its endurance. Wooden houses rot, roads vanish under vines, and mounds collapse, but the soil remains. Long after the people who built it disappeared, Terra Preta still bears witness. It is the soil itself that remembers, a living archive of forgotten civilizations, preserving their ingenuity in every fertile grain. If Terra Preta proves that the Amazon could support complex societies, modern tools prove that such societies existed. The soil tells us it was possible. LiDAR and satellite mapping show us what was built upon it. With these technologies, archaeologists are beginning to peel back the canopy and reveal what lies hidden beneath: geoglyphs, roads, canals, and settlements. The skeletal remains of cities that once flourished in the green heart of the continent. For generations, the Amazon kept its past cloaked beneath the forest. Scholars dismiss the stories of explorers like Carvajal, reasoning that if great cities once existed here, they would have left behind the kinds of ruins seen elsewhere in the Americas: stone pyramids rising above the jungle temples, etched with glyphs, monumental palaces built to defy time. But the Amazon offered none of these. It was a place of wood and earth, and in such a climate, those materials are as fleeting as smoke. Towns built of palm and clay could vanish in decades. Only the soil, only the faintest traces endured. Yet the forest could not hide everything forever. In recent decades, armed with new tools, scientists have begun to see what the naked eye cannot. The most transformative of these tools is LiDAR, short for light detection and ranging, a technology that uses lasers to map the ground. From helicopters or drones, LiDAR instruments fire millions of laser pulses per second. Most strike leaves, branches, and vines, but some slip through the gaps, bouncing off the forest floor. By collecting these echoes and stripping away the canopy in digital reconstructions, LiDAR creates a ghostly image of the ground beneath the trees, a map in which every mound, ditch, and road emerges in sharp relief. To archaeologists working in dense jungle, LiDAR is nothing short of a revelation. Places that would have taken decades of surveying can now be mapped in days. In areas once thought empty, entire landscapes of human engineering appear, hidden until the forest is digitally peeled away. One of the earliest hints came not from LiDAR, but from the chainsaws of cattle ranchers. In the state of Acre, Brazil, deforestation cleared away the canopy, exposing strange shapes in the earth. From above they were unmistakable, massive geometric designs carved into the soil. Circles, squares, rectangles, and more complex polygons, some hundreds of meters across. These are the geoglyphs, monumental earthworks created at least 2,000 years ago. By 2020, over 450 had been identified in Acre alone, and archaeologists suspect that thousands more remain hidden under intact forest. Their purpose remains uncertain. Some may have been ceremonial enclosures, spaces for ritual gatherings. Others may have served as community centers, defensive works, or territorial markers. Whatever their function, their sheer size and precision reveal careful planning and a labor force large enough to execute ambitious projects. The geoglyphs were not the product of scattered bands of foragers. They were built by organized societies capable of reshaping landscapes on a monumental scale. And the geoglyphs were not isolated. Roads radiate from them, sometimes perfectly straight, extending for kilometers through forest and plain. Habitation mounds cluster nearby, places where families built homes above floodwaters. Pottery fragments litter the soil, decorated with intricate designs, evidence of daily life. Together they form a picture not of isolated monuments, but of networks. Settlements linked by infrastructure, landscapes engineered for permanence. Farther south, in Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos, LIDAR has pulled back the veil on an even more extraordinary landscape. The Llanos are seasonally flooded savannas on the edge of the Amazon basin. For centuries, they were thought to be marginal lands, incapable of supporting large populations. But from the air, LIDAR revealed vast networks of raised causeways, canals, and platforms. Entire regions were transformed by human engineering. Here, enormous platforms, some covering several hectares, supported plazas, pyramidal mounds, and ceremonial complexes. Roads, perfectly straight, cut across the savanna for kilometers, connecting villages to centers of power. Canals channeled water both to irrigate crops and to control floods. Reservoirs captured fish during dry seasons, ensuring a steady food supply. What looked like wilderness was, in fact, a designed environment shaped by centuries of labor. The scale is astonishing. Some of the cities revealed by LIDAR in the Llanos are larger in area than central London. They were not simple villages, but regional capitals, hubs of religion, politics, and trade. Surrounding them, fields of raised earth extended in every direction, evidence of intensive agriculture. In this landscape, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people lived, worked, and thrived. These discoveries are rewriting our understanding of the Amazon. Where once scholars imagined only scattered bands, we now see low-density urbanism, sprawling networks of towns, villages, ceremonial centers, and managed landscapes. Unlike the compact stone cities of the Maya or the Inca, Amazonian cities were diffuse, integrated with the forest. They blended habitation with orchards, fields, and waterways, creating mosaics of human and ecological life. Some scholars call them garden cities, settlements where people and forest coexisted in designed harmony. This model challenges our traditional definitions of civilization. For centuries, archaeology has equated greatness with stone, the enduring pyramids of Egypt, the temples of Angkor, the walls of Cusco. But the Amazon shows us another possibility: civilizations whose material was not stone, but earth, wood, and living forest. They may have vanished faster, but while they lasted, they were no less sophisticated. Population estimates bear this out. If the geoglyphs of Acre and the cities of the Llanos are any indication, the Amazon as a whole may have supported 5 to 10 million inhabitants before European contact. That is comparable to the populations of contemporary Europe. Suddenly, Carvajal's chronicles no longer sound fanciful. His descriptions of towns stretching for miles along the riverbanks, of organized armies, of roads vanishing into the forest, these fit neatly with what LIDAR now shows. He was not hallucinating. He was bearing witness to a world erased before anyone else could see it, and the discoveries are not confined to Acre and Bolivia. In 2022, archaeologists in Ecuador's Upano Valley announced the results of a major LIDAR survey. What they revealed were cities dating back 2.5 millennia, among the earliest large-scale urban settlements yet found in the Amazon. These cities contained plazas, ceremonial centers, and rectilinear road networks, suggesting a planned and hierarchical society. Their existence pushes the timeline of Amazonian complexity even deeper into the past. What makes these revelations even more humbling is how little of the Amazon has been explored. Less than 1% of the basin has been systematically surveyed with LIDAR. If so much has been found in such a small sample, what else lies hidden under the canopy? The scale of the unknown is staggering. Entire civilizations may still rest beneath the green veil, waiting for discovery, but even now patterns are emerging. Across the Amazon, we see repeated themes: geometric earthworks, straight roads, raised platforms, canals, and managed forests. These were not isolated experiments. They reflect a shared set of ideas, an Amazonian tradition of landscape engineering that spanned thousands of kilometers and centuries of time. This was not wilderness. It was a continent-wide cultural system, as real and as complex as those of the Andes or Mesoamerica, even if its ruins are harder to see. And so, the forest begins to speak. With every scan, with every excavation, its silence is broken. Where scholars once saw only nature, we now see culture. Where they saw wilderness, we see memory. And where they imagined absence, we now uncover presence, the presence of millions of people living in harmony with one of the most challenging environments on Earth and leaving behind a legacy written not in stone, but in earth water and soil. The images revealed by LiDAR are breathtaking. Vast networks of geoglyphs, causeways cutting straight across the savanna, platforms the size of city blocks. But behind these geometric lines were people, families, communities, leaders, and artisans who lived their days in the shadow of the forest, shaping and being shaped by it. To understand their world, we must come down from the air and touch the soil, examining what remains in the ground, the fragments of pottery, the bones of fish, the layers of dark earth that still whisper of human presence. Across the basin, archaeologists have uncovered habitation mounds, artificial platforms where people built their homes above floodwaters. These were not temporary camps, but permanent settlements, carefully designed to endure. Some mounds rise several meters and stretch across hectares, requiring enormous effort to construct. To build them meant not only moving earth, but organizing labor, coordinating hundreds, perhaps thousands of people over long periods. Such work speaks of leadership, planning, and a collective vision. Excavations on these mounds reveal post holes, the footprints of large communal houses built of wood and palm thatch. Within these structures, extended families lived together, sharing hearths, storing food, and producing crafts. The walls have long since decayed, but the layout remains etched in the soil. Here, archaeologists find charred seeds, bones of riverfish, and fragments of pottery, the humble traces of daily meals. Every broken shard of ceramic is a testament to a cook preparing cassava or maize, a family gathering to eat, a community sustaining itself in the heart of the forest. The pottery itself is astonishing in its variety. In some regions, vessels are plain, practical, built for cooking and storage. In others, they are elaborately decorated. The Santarém region of Brazil, for example, produced ceramics of remarkable artistry. Jars shaped like human figures, vessels adorned with intricate incised patterns, effigies of animals both real and mythical. These pieces were not merely functional. They carried meaning, perhaps linked to ritual, status, or identity. In their forms, we glimpse a symbolic world as complex as the geometric earthworks that framed their towns. Ceramics also tell us about networks of exchange, pottery styles spread over vast distances, suggesting contact between communities hundreds of kilometers apart. Some vessels appear far from their places of origin, carried along rivers by canoe. Archaeologists also find exotic materials, obsidian blades from the Andes, shells from coastal regions, stones from distant quarries. These items speak of trade routes that connected the Amazon to the wider world of South America. Far from being isolated, Amazonian societies were plugged into continental networks of exchange, ideas, and influence. If pottery reveals culture, the landscape itself reveals ingenuity. One of the most striking aspects of Amazonian archaeology is the evidence of water management. In the floodplains of Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos, vast systems of canals, reservoirs, and causeways crisscross the land. These were not minor adjustments to the environment, but wholesale redesigns. Canals drained excess water during floods, irrigated crops in dry seasons, and provided fish year-round. Raised fields constructed from earth lifted crops above floodwaters, ensuring reliable harvests. Reservoirs, some the size of small lakes, stored water and aquatic life. This was landscape engineering on a monumental scale, a civilization not only adapting to its environment, but mastering it. Elsewhere in the basin, similar patterns emerge. Archaeologists have documented orchards of useful trees surrounding ancient settlements. Brazil nuts, palms, fruits, and medicinal species. Many of these trees are disproportionately abundant near archaeological sites, suggesting deliberate planting. Genetic studies confirm that these species were domesticated or encouraged by human hands. What we think of as wild Amazonian biodiversity is in part a cultural legacy, the forest itself shaped as a vast orchard, tended by generations of cultivators. This challenges our entire conception of what civilization looks like. For centuries, the West has defined civilization by its monuments, pyramids, palaces, walls, and temples. But in the Amazon, civilization expressed itself not only in earthworks but in living systems, soils engineered to endure, forests planted to feed, rivers redirected to serve human needs. The legacy is not stone, but life itself. And within that life there was daily rhythm. Families rose with the dawn, paddling canoes to fish in rivers or tend crops in raised fields. Hunters slipped into the forest with bows and darts tipped with curare. Children learned to weave, to shape pottery, to plant and harvest. Elders recited stories of ancestors who built the roads, the mounds, the geoglyphs. In plazas, communities gathered to celebrate, to trade, to honor spirits with feasts and rituals. The scale was large, the organization complex, but the texture of life was human and familiar, the warmth of firelight, the taste of roasted manioc, the sound of drums echoing through the forest. Yet this life was fragile. The Amazon is a place of abundance, but also of constant threat. Floods could overwhelm fields, droughts could dry rivers, predators lurked in the canopy, disease moved silently long before Europeans arrived. Communities adapted by dispersing risk, maintaining multiple fields, relying on both crops and wild foods, blending settlement with forest in resilient mosaics. Their systems were not only sophisticated, but sustainable, designed to endure in a volatile environment. The fragility lay not in their knowledge, but in their visibility. Wood decays, thatch rots, bones dissolve. Unlike the Inca or the Maya, who built in stone, Amazonian civilizations left behind little that could withstand centuries of abandonment. When their populations collapsed after European contact, their cities vanished almost overnight, reclaimed by vines and roots. What survived were the things most difficult to erase: the engineered soils, the patterns etched into the land, and the biodiversity still echoing their choices. And even these legacies are endangered. As modern agriculture clears forest for cattle and soy, earthworks are plowed flat, mounds leveled, geoglyphs erased. Logging and mining strip away both canopy and culture. Archaeologists race against time, working to document sites before they are destroyed. Each loss is irreversible, each forgotten mound a missing chapter in the story of humanity. Yet what has been uncovered so far is enough to transform our understanding. The Amazon was not an empty wilderness. It was a cultural heartland, home to millions, sustained by the most sophisticated ecological engineering in the ancient world. Its legacy is not only in the artifacts we dig from the soil, but in the very forest itself, a living testament to human imagination and resilience. When we look at the Amazon today, we must ask how much of what we see is natural and how much is cultural. The answer may be inseparable. The forest and its people were entwined for millennia, shaping each other in ways that blur the boundary between nature and civilization. And in that entanglement lies a lesson, one we are only beginning to grasp. When we imagine lost civilizations, we often think of silence, vanished peoples, abandoned cities, ruins reclaimed by the elements. But in the Amazon, the past was never truly silent. It has lived on, carried through centuries in the voices of those who remained. For countless generations, indigenous communities preserved memory, not with stone inscriptions or written texts, but through stories, songs, and rituals. Their oral traditions, dismissed for centuries as myth or fable, are increasingly being recognized for what they are: cultural archives that hold echoes of a forgotten world. Among the Tucano people of the northwest Amazon, stories speak of ancestral journeys along the rivers, led by culture heroes who organized society and gave laws. These are not casual tales, but sacred histories recounting how settlements were founded and how roads once linked distant communities. When archaeologists listened, then mapped the ground, they found straight roads and village networks exactly where Tucano elders said they would be. The myths, it turned out, were also maps. The Kwikuro of the upper Xingu region tell of ancient roads and plazas built by their forebears. For years, anthropologists recorded these accounts politely, filing them as folklore. Then Ladar confirmed what the Kwikuro had always known. Beneath the forest lay carefully planned road systems and vast circular villages, their geometry precise, their plazas aligned. Oral tradition had remembered what the earth had concealed. Other stories speak not of flourishing, but of collapse. Myths recount great towns swallowed by the forest, or floods that erased entire peoples. Some tell of plagues sent by spirits to punish arrogance, reducing once mighty populations to scattered bands. To outsiders, these sounded like allegories. But to those who know the history of European contact, they resonate with tragic realism. Smallpox, measles, influenza, diseases invisible and unstoppable, swept through the basin in the 16th century, killing perhaps 90% of the population. Entire communities vanished within a generation. For survivors, the memory of thriving societies gave way to stories of sudden catastrophe. Encoded in myth is the trauma of collapse. The Munduruku recall ancient wars that required thousands of warriors. To Western scholars, such numbers once seemed exaggerated, but after Carvajal's reports of large-scale battles along the river were rediscovered, the stories gained new weight. Oral history and colonial chronicle, once separate, now reinforce each other. Even myths that seem fantastical may contain truths. Legends of cities ruled by women warriors, the Amazons of the rainforest, echo Carvajal-esque chronicles. Whether these stories describe real matriarchal polities or symbolic inversions of power, they hint at a diversity of social forms that archaeology has barely begun to uncover. But indigenous knowledge is not only about history, it is also about ecology. Across the basin, communities maintain detailed knowledge of plants, animals, and seasonal cycles. They know which trees bear fruit in which months, which fish migrate with which floods, which soils can be revived, and which must be abandoned. This ecological knowledge, transmitted orally, is itself the legacy of civilizations that thrived for millennia. The wild forest, shaped by human choice, still reflects the memories of those who managed it. Languages, too, carry history. The Amazon is home to extraordinary linguistic diversity, hundreds of languages across dozens of families. Within them are loanwords that trace the movement of crops, tools, and ideas. The very words for cassava cultivation, shared across distant tongues, point to ancient networks of exchange. In their grammar and vocabulary, these languages preserve a map of past interactions, migrations, and cultural flows. Today, archaeology and indigenous tradition are converging. Where once scholars dismissed myths, they now see them as guides. When communities speak of sacred mounds or ancestral plazas, excavations often confirm long-term human use. In some cases, the collaboration has gone further. Indigenous groups now co-author research, their voices recognized as essential to understanding the past. The shift is not only academic, but ethical, a step toward correcting centuries of marginalization. This convergence reveals something profound, that the Amazon's civilizations were never truly lost. Their descendants remain, carrying forward memory in story, song, and practice. Epidemics and conquest shattered populations, but identity endured. The persistence of oral tradition across 5 centuries of devastation is itself evidence of resilience. It means that when we speak of rediscovering Amazonian civilizations, we are not unearthing strangers. We are listening to the great-grandchildren of those who built the roads, raised the mounds, and planted the orchards. And these voices remind us to expand our definition of civilization. Western scholars long sought kings, palaces, and writing as proof of greatness. But indigenous traditions emphasize community, ecology, and spirituality. In their telling, civilization is not only about monuments, but about harmony with the forest, about continuity across generations, about resilience in the face of change. Their model of history does not separate humans from nature. It entwines them, weaving people, rivers, and trees into a single story. To listen to these voices is to be humbled. For too long, scholars assumed silence and projected absence. Now we see that the silence was our own, born of refusal to hear. The Amazon remembers, not in stone, but in soil, in forest, and in the words of those who still walk its rivers. But uncovering this past is not simple. The Amazon is as much an obstacle to archaeology as it is a source of revelation. In the next chapter, we will step into the challenges of discovery, the relentless climate, the fragility of evidence, and the urgency of a race against time. The Amazon holds its secrets tightly. For archaeologists, it is both a dream and a nightmare, a place where discoveries can rewrite history, but where every step is a battle against time, nature, and circumstance. Unlike the deserts of Egypt, where pyramids endure for millennia, or the highlands of Peru, where stone walls still stand, the Amazon erases human traces almost as quickly as they are made. The climate is relentless. Rain falls year-round, washing nutrients from the soil, flooding lowlands, and turning paths into rivers of mud. Humidity seeps into everything, feeding mold, rust, and rot. In this environment, organic material stands little chance. Wood, the primary building material of Amazonian civilizations, decays within decades. Thatch roofs vanish in years. Even bones dissolve in the acidic earth. What endures are the least perishable traces: shards of pottery, charred seeds, earthworks raised above floodplains, and patches of blackened soil. Cities of wood and palm that once bustled with thousands could disappear within a generation, leaving little more than subtle rises in the ground, invisible beneath the canopy. The forest itself conspires in concealment. Its growth is ferocious, its appetite endless. A clearing left untended will sprout saplings in weeks, vines in months, and within a few years the jungle will appear as though it has always been there. The forest is not simply a backdrop, but an active force, constantly reclaiming what people build. For archaeologists on the ground, visibility shrinks to mere meters, the dense foliage reducing vast sites to fragments glimpsed through leaves. Only from above, with LiDAR's digital eye, do the shapes emerge clearly: the lines of roads, the edges of plazas, the curves of geoglyphs hidden beneath the green tide. And then there are the dangers of working in the field. The Amazon is not only a difficult place to preserve the past, it is a difficult place to live and work in the present. Mosquitoes carry malaria, dengue, and yellow fever. Heat and humidity sap strength. Venomous snakes coil unseen beneath leaves. Even simple logistics, moving people, equipment, and supplies into remote areas, can be punishing. Many promising sites remain virtually inaccessible, hidden behind days of river travel and dense undergrowth. Seasonal rhythms complicate matters further. Floods can submerge landscapes for months, while droughts can render rivers impassable. Fieldwork here is dictated as much by the moods of the forest as by research plans. Even when archaeologists reach a site, the evidence is fragile. Earthen mounds crumble under rain, ditches fill with silt. Once exposed, sites degrade rapidly if not carefully protected. Worse still are the pressures of the modern world. Ranching, soy farming, and logging strip away forest cover, not only threatening ecosystems, but obliterating archaeology. Bulldozers flatten geoglyphs in days. Farmers plow through ancient mounds without knowing they are there. Each season of expansion erases more of the past, often before it can be recorded. This creates a painful paradox. To study ancient Amazonian civilizations, archaeologists must sometimes disturb the forest, cutting paths and excavating mounds. Yet every intervention risks damaging the very ecosystem that those civilizations once shaped. The question is constant. How do we uncover the past without destroying the present? Increasingly, researchers turn to non-invasive tools, LiDAR, satellite mapping, soil analysis, methods that minimize disturbance while opening windows into the hidden past. But these technologies are expensive, and the Amazon is vast. With less than 1% of the basin systematically surveyed, the scale of the unknown dwarfs the scale of discovery. Time is not on our side. Deforestation accelerates each year, driven by global demand for cattle, soy, and timber. Climate change adds new pressures, shifting rainfall patterns, intensifying droughts, and fueling fires in a forest not adapted to burn. Every tree lost risks exposing and destroying an archaeological site. Every year of delay means that more of the record vanishes irretrievably. Unlike stone monuments, which can weather centuries of neglect, earthworks erased by bulldozers are gone forever. These challenges explain why the Amazon remained a blank space on the archaeological map for so long. Early explorers saw glimpses of civilization, but found little physical proof. Later scholars, seeing the forest's erasure at work, concluded that there was nothing to find. Only now, with modern tools and a new willingness to listen to indigenous memory, are we beginning to recover the truth. But even now, progress is painstaking. Each site mapped, each mound excavated, is a small island of certainty in a sea of mystery. And yet this difficulty makes each discovery all the more powerful. Fragile though they are, the traces endure. A shard of pottery, a line of soil darker than its surroundings, a ditch carved 2,000 years ago, and still faintly visible beneath the canopy. These are enough to challenge centuries of assumptions. They remind us that absence is not proof of emptiness. It is only proof of forgetting. The Amazon has not been empty. It has been silent. And silence is not the same as absence. In the next chapter, we step back from the jungle floor to consider the broader implications. What do these revelations mean for our understanding of human history? If the Amazon was once a cradle of civilization, how must we rethink our definitions of progress, resilience, and the relationship between people and their environments? For centuries, the Amazon was cast in the Western imagination as a void, an endless wilderness hostile to civilization, untouched until modernity. This image was not accidental. It served the narratives of empire and colonization, justifying the dispossession of indigenous peoples by declaring their lands empty. If the forest was a pristine wilderness, then those who lived there were marginal, their presence fleeting, their societies insignificant. But each discovery, each geoglyph revealed by LiDAR, each patch of terra preta, each story preserved in oral tradition chips away at this illusion. Together they force us to rethink what history itself means. The old narrative rested on a narrow vision of civilization. In this view, Civilization is measured in stone and writing. It is pyramids that endure for millennia, inscriptions carved in glyphs, empires ruled by kings. By that standard, the Amazon seemed to fail. It left no stone monuments, no written archives, no walls standing tall against time. Scholars assumed that what could not be seen did not exist. But civilizations need not be built of stone to be real. The Amazon shows us a different path, societies that engineered soil instead of stone, orchards instead of walls, canals instead of aqueducts. Their monuments were living systems, designed to regenerate rather than endure as ruins. Their legacy was not permanence in rock, but resilience in life. This is not a lesser form of civilization. It is another model, adapted to a different environment, as valid as any in human history. Consider Terra Preta. For centuries, the assumption was that the Amazon's poor soils doomed it to marginality, but ancient Amazonians refused to accept that limit. They invented a way to create fertility where none existed, producing a soil that remains productive centuries later. In doing so, they anticipated some of the most urgent challenges of our own time. Today, as modern agriculture exhausts soils and drives climate change, scientists look to Terra Preta as a model for sustainable farming. What we once dismissed as primitive may, in fact, have been more advanced in its ecological wisdom than our industrial systems. Or consider the geoglyphs and earthworks. They are not as tall as pyramids nor as enduring as stone temples, but in their scale, their geometry, their precision, they reveal societies capable of organization and vision. Roads stretch straight as arrows across kilometers of forest and plain, linking settlements into networks that covered vast regions. These were not scattered bands of foragers. They were communities bound together by infrastructure, ritual, and shared purpose. The Amazon also challenges the very idea of wilderness. For centuries, Europeans imagined it as untouched, a virgin forest, but the evidence now suggests that much of what we think of as wild is, in fact, cultural. The distribution of trees, the abundance of useful species, the mosaics of forest and savanna, these are not accidents of nature, but the product of human choice. The Amazon, in this view, is not only a natural ecosystem, but also a cultural landscape, as much the creation of human hands as any terraced field or walled city. This realization forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. The image of the Amazon as pristine was not only inaccurate, it was politically convenient. By erasing the history of its civilizations, colonizers justified treating it as empty. By denying the depth of indigenous presence, they legitimized exploitation. To recognize the Amazon as a cultural landscape is to recognize the rights and histories of the peoples who still live there. It is to admit that their ancestors were not marginal but central, and that their descendants carry legacies as old and as rich as any on earth. The implications extend beyond the Amazon. They force us to reconsider the diversity of human civilization. Too often, history has been told through a single lens: monumental architecture, centralized states, written records. But humanity is more varied than that. Civilizations have flourished in deserts, mountains, islands, and forests, each developing forms suited to their environments. The Amazon societies remind us that resilience, adaptability, and sustainability are also hallmarks of civilization. If we define greatness only by what leaves stone ruins, we blind ourselves to other ways of being. The story also humbles us. For centuries, scholars believed that the Amazon could not support great populations. They assumed that human ingenuity was bounded by environment, that the forest imposed strict limits. But the evidence shows otherwise. Ancient Amazonians refused those limits. They transformed their world, creating soils, orchards, and cities in a place once deemed impossible. In their success, we see the breadth of human adaptability. Civilization is not the privilege of a few landscapes. It is the birthright of humanity, expressed in countless forms across the globe. And yet, there is tragedy in this story. The civilizations of the Amazon did not collapse of their own accord. They were shattered by contact with Europe. Disease, conquest, and enslavement reduced populations by as much as 90% within a century. Towns that had thrived for generations were emptied almost overnight. And because their material culture was perishable, their memory faded quickly, erased not only by the forest, but by the indifference of those who came after. For centuries, their achievements were denied, their voices silenced. To rediscover them now is not only an act of archaeology, it is an act of justice. It restores to the peoples of the Amazon a history long denied. It acknowledges that their ancestors built, organized, and thrived in ways worthy of respect, and it reminds us that their descendants are not relics of a stone age, but heirs to civilizations as real as any in the world. In this way, the Amazon changes not only how we see the past, but how we imagine the future. Its civilizations offer lessons in resilience and sustainability that speak directly to our current crises. They show that it is possible to create abundance without destroying ecosystems, to engineer fertility without exhausting soil, to design societies that endure in harmony with their environments. Their model was not one of domination, but of integration. In a century defined by environmental collapse, that lesson may be more valuable than any pyramid or palace. And so the Amazon forces us to expand our imagination of history. It is no longer a void, a counterfeit paradise, an untouched wilderness. It is a heartland of human creativity, a place where millions lived, worked, and thrived, shaping one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth. Its legacy is not stone monuments, but living forests, not ruins, but resilience. It is, in every sense, a civilization, though one we are only beginning to understand. As we reach the end of this journey, one question remains. What do we do with this knowledge? How do we honor the memory of civilizations rediscovered, protect their fragile traces, and learn from their wisdom in a world that desperately needs it? For centuries, the Amazon was cast in the Western imagination as a void, an endless wilderness hostile to civilization, untouched until modernity. This image was not accidental. It served the narratives of empire and colonization, justifying the dispossession of indigenous peoples by declaring their lands empty. If the forest was a pristine wilderness, then those who lived there were marginal, their presence fleeting, their societies insignificant. But each discovery, each geoglyph revealed by LiDAR, each patch of terra preta, each story preserved in oral tradition chips away at this illusion. Together they force us to rethink what history itself means. The old narrative rested on a narrow vision of civilization. In this view, civilization is measured in stone and writing. It is pyramids that endure for millennia, inscriptions carved in glyphs, empires ruled by kings. By that standard, the Amazon seemed to fail. It left no stone monuments, no written archives, no wall standing tall against time. Scholars assumed that what could not be seen did not exist. But civilizations need not be built of stone to be real. The Amazon shows us a different path, societies that engineered soil instead of stone, orchards instead of walls, canals instead of aqueducts. Their monuments were living systems, designed to regenerate rather than endure as ruins. Their legacy was not permanence in rock, but resilience in life. This is not a lesser form of civilization. It is another model adapted to a different environment, as valid as any in human history. Consider terra preta. For centuries, the assumption was that the Amazon's poor soils doomed it to marginality. But ancient Amazonians refused to accept that limit. They invented a way to create fertility where none existed, producing a soil that remains productive centuries later. In doing so, They anticipated some of the most urgent challenges of our own time. Today, as modern agriculture exhausts soils and drives climate change, scientists look to Terra Preta as a model for sustainable farming. What we once dismissed as primitive may, in fact, have been more advanced in its ecological wisdom than our industrial systems. Or consider the geoglyphs and earthworks. They are not as tall as pyramids, nor as enduring as stone temples, but in their scale, their geometry, their precision, they reveal societies capable of organization and vision. Roads stretch straight as arrows across kilometers of forest and plain, linking settlements into networks that covered vast regions. These were not scattered bands of foragers. They were communities bound together by infrastructure, ritual, and shared purpose. The Amazon also challenges the very idea of wilderness. For centuries, Europeans imagined it as untouched, a virgin forest. But the evidence now suggests that much of what we think of as wild is, in fact, cultural. The distribution of trees, the abundance of useful species, the mosaics of forest and savanna, these are not accidents of nature, but the product of human choice. The Amazon, in this view, is not only a natural ecosystem, but also a cultural landscape, as much the creation of human hands as any terraced field or walled city. This realization forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. The image of the Amazon as pristine was not only inaccurate, it was politically convenient. By erasing the history of its civilizations, colonizers justified treating it as empty. By denying the depth of indigenous presence, they legitimized exploitation. To recognize the Amazon as a cultural landscape is to recognize the rights and histories of the peoples who still live there. It is to admit that their ancestors were not marginal, but central, and that their descendants carry legacies as old and as rich as any on Earth. The implications extend beyond the Amazon. They force us to reconsider the diversity of human civilization. Too often, history has been told through a single lens: monumental architecture, centralized states, written records. But humanity is more varied than that. Civilizations have flourished in deserts, mountains, islands, and forests, each developing forms suited to their environments. The Amazon societies remind us that resilience, adaptability, and sustainability are also hallmarks of civilization. If we define greatness only by what leaves stone ruins, we blind ourselves to other ways of being. The story also humbles us. For centuries, scholars believed that the Amazon could not support great populations. They assumed that human ingenuity was bounded by environment, that the forest imposed strict limits. But the evidence shows otherwise. Ancient Amazonians refused those limits. They transformed their world, creating soils, orchards, and cities in a place once deemed impossible. In their success, we see the breadth of human adaptability. Civilization is not the privilege of a few landscapes. It is the birthright of humanity, expressed in countless forms across the globe. And yet, there is tragedy in the story. The civilizations of the Amazon did not collapse of their own accord. They were shattered by contact with Europe. Disease, conquest, and enslavement reduced populations by as much as 90% within a century. Towns that had thrived for generations were emptied almost overnight. And because their material culture was perishable, their memory faded quickly, erased not only by the forest, but by the indifference of those who came after. For centuries their achievements were denied, their voices silenced. To rediscover them now is not only an act of archaeology, it is an act of justice. It restores to the peoples of the Amazon a history long denied. It acknowledges that their ancestors built, organized, and thrived in ways worthy of respect, and it reminds us that their descendants are not relics of a stone age, but heirs to civilizations as real as any in the world. In this way, the Amazon changes not only how we see the past, but how we imagine the future. Its civilizations offer lessons in resilience and sustainability that speak directly to our current crises. They show that it is possible to create abundance without destroying ecosystems, to engineer fertility without exhausting soil, to design societies that endure in harmony with their environments. Their model was not one of domination, but of integration. In a century defined by environmental collapse, that lesson may be more valuable than any pyramid or palace. And so the Amazon forces us to expand our imagination of history. It is no longer a void, a counterfeit paradise, an untouched wilderness. It is a heartland of human creativity, a place where millions lived, worked, and thrived, shaping one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth. Its legacy is not stone monuments, but living forests, not ruins, but resilience. It is, in every sense, a civilization, though one we are only beginning to understand. As we reach the end of this journey, one question remains. What do we do with this knowledge? How do we honor the memory of civilizations rediscovered, protect their fragile traces, and learn from their wisdom in a world that desperately needs it? The Amazon. To outsiders, it has always seemed eternal, a boundless ocean of green stretching beyond the horizon, hiding its secrets beneath an impenetrable canopy. For centuries, it was called a wilderness, a world untouched, a place where civilization could never take root. But as we have seen, this image is not the truth. The forest is not empty, it is not silent. Beneath its leaves, beneath its rivers, beneath its soils, there lingers the memory of a forgotten world, a world of people who not only lived here but thrived, reshaping the very land we once thought unconquerable. What if there was a lost civilization in the Amazon? The answer now seems clear. There was not one, but many. Civilizations that rose in harmony with their environment, civilizations that carved roads through the jungle, raised mounds above the floodwaters, engineered soils that remained fertile centuries later, civilizations that lived in numbers we once thought impossible, their towns and villages stretching for miles along the riverbanks, their orchards and fields woven into the fabric of the forest itself. They did not leave pyramids of stone to defy the ages, but they left something more subtle and perhaps more profound, a living landscape, a cultural forest that still bears their touch today. The signs are everywhere once you learn to look. A patch of terra preta, black and fertile, in a sea of exhausted clay. A geoglyph, its perfect circle etched into the earth, visible only from above. A causeway, straight as an arrow, vanishing into the trees. Even the trees themselves, the Brazil nut, the palm, the fruiting species disproportionately abundant near ancient sites, speak of human design. The Amazon, far from untouched, is a garden. Its biodiversity is not only natural but cultural, the legacy of generations who learned to cultivate the forest as carefully as any field. And yet, their story is one of tragedy as well as triumph. When Europeans first descended the river in the 16th century, they glimpsed this world in its final days. Chroniclers wrote of vast towns, markets, and armies. They saw thousands of warriors massed on the banks, plazas filled with people, roads leading inland. But they also brought something unseen: disease, smallpox, measles, influenza. Epidemics raced ahead of conquest, sweeping through villages faster than explorers could travel. Within a generation, populations collapsed by as much as 90%. The towns fell silent. The fields were abandoned. And because their monuments were made of wood and earth, not stone, the jungle reclaimed them swiftly. What Carvajal saw in 1541, others could never find again. For centuries, scholars assumed he had imagined it. Only now, with new tools, can we see what was hidden. LiDAR pierces the canopy to reveal geometric earthworks, cities larger than London, landscapes engineered on continental scales. Archaeology uncovers pottery, feasting remains, and orchards planted with deliberate care. Indigenous oral histories, once dismissed as myth, speak of roads, floods, and vanished towns, echoing what science now confirms. Piece by piece, the silence is broken. Piece by piece, the forgotten world is restored. And so the Amazon teaches us something vital, that civilization is not one thing, but many. For too long we defined it narrowly. Stone, writing, empire, monuments that endure through centuries. By that definition, the Amazon seemed marginal. But its peoples created another model, one rooted in ecology, in resilience, in living systems. Their monuments were not pyramids, but soils that grow richer with age. Their legacy was not carved in stone, but carried in rivers, forests, and memory. They show us that civilization does not always mean domination of nature. It can mean integration, partnership, and balance. This lesson could not be more urgent. Today, we live in a time of environmental crisis. Our agriculture exhausts soils. Our industries burn carbon, heating the planet. Our forests fall to chainsaws, replaced by fields that deplete the land within a generation. The ancient Amazonians faced similar challenges, and they solved them. Their terra preta sequestered carbon instead of releasing it. Their agroforestry enriched biodiversity instead of destroying it. Their canals and raised fields tamed floods and droughts instead of collapsing in their face. They created abundance without ruin, resilience without collapse. Their wisdom, long forgotten, may hold answers to the questions that now define our survival. But their memory is fragile, and time is running out. Each year, more of the Amazon disappears, cut, burned, and cleared for cattle, soy, and logging. Each year, more archaeological sites are lost before they can be studied. Bulldozers erase geoglyphs in hours that took thousands of hands months to build. Flames consume forests that carry within them the legacy of millennia. Every patch of terra preta plowed under, every mound flattened, every sacred grove destroyed is not only an ecological loss, but a historical one. It is an archive burned, a chapter of humanity erased. To protect the Amazon, then, is not only to save trees and animals. It is to safeguard memory, the memory of civilizations that show us other ways of living. It is to honor the ancestors of those who still call the forest home, descendants who carry forward stories, rituals, and knowledge against all odds. It is to admit that the Amazon was never empty, never marginal, never primitive. It was a center of human achievement, as worthy of respect as any pyramid, temple, or palace. And so we return to the question, what if there was a lost civilization in the Amazon? The answer is not speculative. The evidence surrounds us. The soil remembers. The forest remembers. The people remember. The civilizations of the Amazon were real, and their lessons are as urgent now as they were enduring then. As the camera rises above the canopy, the view expands. Rivers like silver veins, winding endlessly through green. A forest that seems infinite, yet fragile. A horizon glowing with sunset. Beneath that endless sea of leaves lie the traces of a people who once reshaped a continent. Their cities may have vanished, but their legacy lives on, in the land, in the stories, in the very forest itself. The Amazon remembers. The question is whether we will listen, and whether, in listening, we will learn.